The liquid epoxy in cans or jugs is the more common, maybe can be thought of as the more versatile configuration to keep in a small shop or a home shop, because you can glue with it and laminate with it and clear coat with it and saturate fabrics like fiberglass with it. So might be the more versatile system. The critical parameter in mixing liquid epoxy as resin and hardener is that the ratio be correct. The pumps that come with the cans or jugs take care of the volumes. You as the mixer just have to control that you do an equal number of pumps. I've estimated I want a 7-pump batch for my share of what we're going to put on this lap seam. And the best way I know to keep track is count 1 and 1, 2 and 2, 3 and 3, and so on till you've got the amount of liquid. That's 4. Don't get distracted by the telephone or visitors, because if you get the ratio even 1 pump wrong in a small batch, it's not going to cure. And 7. Too much or too little and it's not going to cure, and you've created a sticky mess. The liquid components, the resin and the hardener, have to be thoroughly mixed. Whatever their end use is, you have to thoroughly mix them. Count to 60 seconds, sing the Jeopardy song, walk around the shop 3 times, whatever you need. We're going to thicken this. Epoxy needs to be thickened, especially if you're trying to make an adhesive out of it. And the thickener has to be an appropriate thickener. There are thickeners for lightweight fairing putty. There are thickeners for adhesive work. You've got to make sure you're using a thickener that is intended for adhesive construction work. Now that my liquid epoxy is thoroughly mixed, I'm going to start adding thickener. And I've never quite developed the mojo for measuring how much thickener I need. What I'm going to do is sneak up on it. I know that I'm going to be applying it to a lap seam that is pretty much vertical in a lot of places on this boat. So I want it thick enough that it's going to stay there when I apply it. The classic shop analogy for what I want is smooth, creamy peanut butter. You want something you imagine you can pick up the stick and it's not going to fall off if you held it over your head. And that's obviously not there yet. So that batch of thickener is carefully mixed in. I'm going to add 3 more tablespoons. See where that gets me. We call this diner ketchup. This filler is a little bit buoyant. So just like your mother taught you in the kitchen, you've got to scrape the sides and the bottoms and mix from the bottom. Make sure you've got a consistent batch. And in general, when you start approaching big adventures, it's best to mix several small batches and apply it, rather than guess that you're going to need 20 ounces and try to mix a 20-ounce batch. A 20-ounce batch will get hot and kick before you can get it to the boat, I suspect. There. Feel the viscosity. If you mix and you over thicken, the batch can be salvaged, but don't just idly go over to the pumps and give it another squirt from each. You must take a clean new cup, go to the pumps, take 1 pump from each, thoroughly mix that, and then add it to the over thickened epoxy. That is 1 teaspoon away from being workable. Here's a batch of what I would call peanut butter, smooth, creamy peanut butter. If it's staying on my stick, it'll stay on the boat till I can get the plank in place. Now, to apply this thickened epoxy cleanly and accurately, we're going to use commercial pastry bags from a restaurant supply house. It's a roll of 100, costs about $10. Pastry bags are just wonderful. They're controllable. You can cut a different size opening on the end depending what you're doing. They hold about 16 ounces of thickened epoxy if you want them to. A little cup to hold. Take your spatula. Don't waste any more than you have to. Make sure you get what you can out of the cup. Then the trick to the pastry bags is get the cuff nice and big, and you want to twist. And if you take that twist at the end and bend it over and hold it in your hand, it's not going to squirt out on you out the back door. And you want to take the tip and cut the size notch you want, which you're just going to have to experiment with and figure out. This will do anything the 610 will do, except we just spent 10 minutes mixing this batch, and with the 610 we needn't. You can see why we spent time thickening this. If this was any thinner, it'd be dripping on the floor. But the speed and accuracy of this applicator is far worth the time and money of buying pastry bags and having them on hand and loading one when you need it. And it's time to spread it with a putty knife so that we're sure the glue surface is filled. This is WEST System 610 in a caulking cartridge. Applying it with a caulking gun, it's easy to apply a fairly accurate bead where you want it. I'll come back in a few minutes with a putty knife and spread that across my surface so the entire surface is covered and becomes a 1-inch wide joint. This WEST System 610 is a really convenient and efficient way to apply epoxy. It's a cool setup in that the two parts of the epoxy, the resin and the hardener, are in the cartridge separate from each other, and they're actually mixed in this applicator nozzle as you pump it out. And it's a lovely consistency for this job, as well as a nice accurate way to get it to the boat. And in this compressed time frame project is saving us a heck of a lot of time at the bench mixing liquid epoxy. The convenience of this applicator and pre-thick and so forth comes at a price, but if your time is particularly valuable, or you have the budget, this is a very convenient, efficient way to do epoxy plywood lap straight boat building. In preparation for filling our screw holes, I'm going to mix up a batch of epoxy, and this is the same resin and hardener setup that we used to mix epoxy for our structural work. And to make it into a filler, and the key is we want an easily sandable filler, or what's known in the trade as a low density filler, we'll mix the same epoxy and thicken it with a different thickener. For our structural work, we were using a filleting blend of thickener that is a strong cure strength and a strong cure density, a hard cure density, and the right thing to use when you're bonding structural members. We're going to shift over to a low density filler, or a fairing filler it's often called, whose main working characteristics are lighter weight and much easier to sand. If we were to fill these screw holes with the high density adhesive filler, it'd work fine, but when we get down to the fine prep work, sanding this hull for priming and so forth, you're going to find those spots that you filled are so hard relative to the surrounding wood that you end up sort of dishing the surrounding wood out around the hard spot in the filler. So a well-mixed batch now, resin and hardener, to give me unthickened liquid epoxy, which now gets the filler added in spoonful increments and thoroughly mixed to a consistency that I imagine is going to be able to be applied with a putty knife and not run or sag or drip out of the holes. So somewhere in the creamy peanut butter world. I'm sure you folks can see the dust from this low density filler flying through the air. I keep a really good cartridge dust mask by my epoxy bench in my shop, and don't hesitate to put it on even for the few minutes it takes to make epoxy. For trying to make a video and talk to you, I don't have my mask on right now, but it's something I would suggest. That's thickening up nicely. I'm going to give it one more dollop, stir this up well, and then we'll start applying it to the screw holes. In doing epoxy work, as it cures, the chemical reaction is exothermic. It generates its own heat. That heat increases its speed of cure. So when a batch is mixed, anything you can do to increase its surface area so that heat radiates will increase your working time. And a pallet is a great way to do it. This is a very sophisticated cardboard square I just cut out of a box I found on the floor. Plywood scraps are my more common pallets, but this gives me a nice working configuration and radiates the heat. And I can go to work on the screw holes.